So I would like us to, as a group of teachers, to kind of debrief, do some game tape / play-by-play / debriefing about the first video on John Ashbery's Sum Trees in ModPo. It's a great video. We all took notes with timestamps, I believe, or time signatures, so that we can refer to specific moments in the video that we can share between us and between whoever's joining our conversation. Can I ask you a technical question, Al? I've always wondered this about your teaching. Do you keep track of to whom you've assigned lines and words? Because when I try to do it, if I don't keep track, I completely forget who's responsible for what. The students don't always remember. I feel like my conversation can go off the rails very quickly. Is that just because I'm a more controlling person than you are? Like, how do you do it? How do you remember?
You might be a more controlling person than I am. Wow. Gosh, Julia, sometimes when I'm doing this with a large audience, I have done collective close readings with 200 people. I will have a pen and a pad and I will circle it and try to put a name there. But generally I don't, and I certainly didn't here. In fact, my sheet of paper, I don't know if you can see in the video, hasn't a note on it. That's partly because I know this poem so well. So I'm not bragging. I'm although maybe I am. I don't know. Of course, I know these TAs, the people around me, really well, and I was also going in order. But I didn't know going into this which phrases I would use. And you notice that I worried about time, and so I rambled through the... You
gave someone like 4 different lines.
Yeah, and then and glad not to invent such comeliness, we are surrounded with silence already filled with noises, a canvas on which emerges a chorus of smiles of winter morning, placed in a puzzling light and moving. We skipped. Yeah. Because there is a limit to everyone's patience. And then I assigned moving to someone. Or maybe reticence to Emily at that point. Because one needs to do words and phrases, but I didn't know in advance which. So it's surprisingly improvised.
Okay. Which I think could probably work for a lot of teachers. Maybe other teachers who may be more controlling like me need to script it a little bit more. Or maybe it depends on the classroom.
Well, I would suggest that I like the way you teach very much. And in ModPo Plus, there are some videos where you're leading the discussion, and it's clear you have a set of questions that you want to get in at some point, almost as a reminder to yourself. This method obviates the need for that in a way, because the questions are all, well, what do you think that means? Right. Oh, well, what else could it mean? Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. And I think my question, I'll just say one more really quick thing about this and we should move on. But I think my question is also coming from, my concern as a teacher that everyone gets included, that everyone gets a chance to speak. And I don't want to forget that I've assigned someone something because the conversation has been...
There's nothing more disheartening than forgetting someone. Yeah. Essentially silencing someone through the method. You don't want to do that.
So what specific moments did other people notice?
I have one more quick question for Elle. Do you have a pedagogy of questioning? Like how do you think about all of these really quick, open-ended questions that you use throughout the video as a way to keep things moving forward without being heavy-handed? So I noticed, how have you come to figure out what kinds of questions? Is a question is conversation?
There's a short answer and a long answer. I'll give the short answer. The short answer is I teach in another completely different class. I teach genocide. And in that, I teach the Holocaust, representations of the Holocaust. And in that setting, it's unethical for me to provide answers. And it's unethical for me, I feel it, to ask questions, the answers to which I know. So I have to ask questions that genuinely seek the respondent's answer. So the one thing I've gotten good at is asking questions that really elicit an answer. So usually in this video, it's always, what do you think that means? Where do you think that takes us? What else could he be saying? So I don't know where I developed that, but that's a complete, I'm an addict. I have to ask everything as a question. At the end of this video, as I'm summing up, also hard for me to watch because I was doing a little mini lecture on postmodernism there, and I wanted to make a meta-pedagogical statement about where the course is going. And I find that really hard to watch because although it's a good little set piece, I wanted this to be a close reading and not a grand statement.
But that's part of what happens when you do close reading, right? I mean, as the person who has made the syllabus, you are guiding the class, so it's a good moment to say, so what we're talking about here, we're going to come back around to this later.
Yeah.
You know?
I think this might be a good moment for us to talk about the fetish of the decentered classroom that is in some of the theory that I have virtually memorized, such as the pedagogy of the oppressed.
Right. Yeah.
Filreis he's really a radical. He's a left-winger, and he believes that entire decentering is possible. And I think we should talk about that because I've come to realize I've got a much more personal pedagogy that means I can't be invisible. I want to be decentered, but I'm in the screen. I'm literally in the center, and I'm not going away, even if they do a great job. Does anybody want to say anything about this problem?
Well, I feel like it's important to remember Freire is teaching migrant laborers to organize politically for themselves. So it's like inspiring a grassroots political organization among like really, really poor people. But I think classrooms already have a different kind of whole ideology and structure to them that just, it would be a little foolish, I think, to pretend that you're not the authority because you still are, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're grading their papers, you're assigning them things. And I think you can't completely absolve yourself of a certain amount of responsibility to be the guide and to have some control over things.
But what should be the goal?
I think one really helpful goal is to make room for different kinds of knowledge in the room.
Right.
So you may have certain kinds of knowledge that your students simply don't by virtue of your training or your expertise or your credentials. But I think some of the best teaching happens that makes room for different kinds of knowledge. So that's real world knowledge. It's the ability students have to compare this material to other material to which they're being exposed. Yep. It's their ability to make connections to personal experience. Once you validate those kinds of knowledge as important and relevant to what you're doing and what you're learning, that does some of that decentering work without denying the fact that you have a tremendous amount of authority and power in the classroom. So I notice moments like, so at 13:30, you're sort of coaxing Max to say more about, you're saying, speak for the trees. What would it mean to speak for the trees? And he gets a little stuck.
He doesn't know what to say, he doesn't like the game.
And he doesn't like the game.
That was a therapeutic moment because I wanted Max to loosen up and speak for the trees. And Anna comes in with her joke about speak for the Lorax because it's all very groovy, speaking for the trees. And you notice that Molly totally wants to speak for the trees and even speaks in a tone that the trees might speak. But I'm playing a game with Max to get him to be subjective there. You notice that. And I think there's a risk in that, but I think someone as capable of Max needs to have that experience. What did you think?
Well, I saw a connection between that and I think it was, I can't remember who it was, but he says, stop being such an Ivy League student. Granted, these kids, they're not kids, but these people in the room, we are at Penn, we're at an Ivy League school, but you could say, use some version of that remark, I think, in any setting. Stop trying to worry about the right answer. Right. And just tell me what you think. And it seems to me that all these moments are variations on that, or feel.
Yes, I do that a lot, and because these people give second level answers, and I think if we're teaching, because these videos are a model for teaching and learning. So second level answers to start with are not helpful.
Can you say what a second level answer is?
Well, a second level answer is to focus on the meta text or to, the first thing you want to think about when you deal with some trees is, who are these people? Are they in love? Is it a love poem? it's a nature poem, trees, right? But the ModPo TAs are assuming that, and they're not all that interested in that because they've been trained to be metapoetical and to see this maybe as a gay love poem and a model for the way Ashbery learns to write as a young poet. But that's what happens at the very end. So I get very, I want ordination at that point. I'm not good in that situation because I get impatient.
But you do, I think, exactly what we all should do in those moments, which is like, okay, but what's this word? What's this
Stop being so fancy and just say the word.
Yeah.
Do you sympathize with that?
I do. And I was kind of keeping track of moments where I might pause that video and invite my students to join in the conversation. And those particular moments where you're moving back to more of the first level questions and answers are the moments where I felt like this could really envelop my own classroom in an exciting way. Like at 5:30, you're asking, what kind of relationship do trees have? And that, that's a moment where you could really pause. And then again, that same moment that Julia was just referring to with Max, at around like 12:40, right before that, there's a beautiful definition of personify as bringing something alive with language. And that's another moment where you could just pause and have a conversation with students about like, well, what's going on here between Al and Max? What is the poem? What is this key to the poem and why is it so difficult to articulate it? Where are things going there?
I think it's great too because these videos really give every viewer an opportunity to talk about pedagogy.
Yep.
When I use this with my students, we talked about pedagogy a lot. How's it going? What's the conversation? How's So it's already on the table.
What I'm dying to know what else you had in your notes. There's timestamp notes.
Oh yeah. So because I imagine like when I've worked with the ModPo videos in my own classrooms, I do sort of like a stop and go thing where I have moments keyed up where I know that I want to pause and I want to bring my class into the conversation before they sort of find out the secret of what's to come. So I was just kind of listing, beginning at 5:31 with the what kind of relationship do trees have. Then about a minute later at like 6:25, there's a comment, I don't know who said it, that talks about how a line is difficult and how do you read it. That's another moment where I would stop and say, okay, what is that line and how would we read it before going forward and hearing?
And that's also a moment that you could connect back to what else have we been reading together in this classroom that was difficult and how does this discussion help us understand difficulty?
Right. And then, little things like at around 8:55, what is a classic Ashbery paradox? Like I would probably pause and talk a little bit about, with my own students, what is a paradox? What's an Ashbery paradox? What's the game happening in the video? Is the game happening in the video related to some of the games happening in the language of the poem?
So there are at least two games in the video. Yeah. One is Allie and I being trees, and then I ask someone, what just happened? What were we? Because she's trying to deal with silent performance. And the other game is Speak for the Trees. There might be others. There are games all over the place, and they're spontaneous games.
Yeah. And I think that they're fun and helpful. And then I think I would also stop the video again at around 15 where you begin to say, I also think this poem is about. And that's a moment where I would stop before they hear the rest of that sentence and use that as an opportunity to say, okay, so we've been engaged in this close reading and conversation with this video. At this point, what else is the poem about? What have we not talked about?
That's right.
Where do you think, the people in the video are about to go with this sentence? So those are just a couple of my moments that I would definitely use in the classroom.
Julia, your final
my final word is a little prosaic in comparison to what you just said, but I'm thinking really practically about how your technique can be modified to include writing in the classroom, and I know Erica has a lot of thoughts about this too, but I could imagine, for example, taking all the assignments that you use in this poem, in this video, which I would be sharing with my classroom, giving those same assignments to my students, pausing the video, let them run with those by writing something down, and then we watch the video, we hear what your students have to say about those parts of the poem, and we could come up with some really interesting comparisons, because I think what that would I imagine what that would do is give students the opportunity to respond without knowing how you're supposed to respond, if you know what I mean. So they can do it a little more spontaneously, and then they see one more model of how to do it, how to get into the poem in that way.
That's great.
Thanks.